You are listening to Podolsky come to you to talk haunted Vermont. However, in this season, we're going to take a look at some very interesting folklore, urban legends, and some true crime. So, stay tuned and get your spooks on. In order to save energy during a long, cold Vermont winter, the truly ingenious old-time Vermont native would find a way to conserve food and heat by freezing their old folks. Yes, you heard me right. By freezing their old folks for the duration of winter and thawing them out in the springtime. Maybe Vermonters we're on to something long before science fiction made suspended animation worth consideration. These days, there are cryogenic laboratories free-drying the heads and bodies of those who can't afford it. But unfortunately, or fortunately, due to cell damage during freezing, they haven't figured out a way to bring frozen folks back to life. Perhaps the old-timers in Vermont can give them a few tips. A strange tale describing this unbelievable ritual was published on the front page of the Vermont Pillier, Argus, and Patriot on December 21st, 1887. The story, reported to be true, tells of a poor northern Vermont family who had established the idea of putting their elderly and weakest family members into cold storage until they could be thawed out just in time for spring planting. What you're about to hear now is a story by Wesley S. Griswold from Mischief in the Mountains, published by Vermont Life, 1970. The Argus and Patriot listed the authors as A.M., noting the events took place in the mountain town some 20 miles from Montpelier. A.M. wrote that the tale was told by his Uncle William's diary. January 7th. I went on the mountain today and witnessed what to me was a horrible sight. It seemed that the dwellers there who are unable, either from age or other reason, to contribute to the support of their families are disposed of in the winter months in a manner that will shock the one who reads this diary, unless that person lives in that vicinity. I will describe what I saw. 6 people, 4 men, and 2 women. One of the men, a cripple, about 30 years old. The other 5, past the age of usefulness, lay on the earthly floor of the cabin, drugged into insensibility, while members of their families were gathered about them in apparent indifference. In a short time, the unconscious bodies were inspected by several old people who said, "They are ready." They were then stripped of all their clothing, except a single garment. Then the bodies were carried outside and laid on logs exposed to the bitter cold mountain air, the operation having been delayed several days for suitable weather. It was night when the bodies were carried out, and the full moon, occasionally obscured by flying clouds, shone on their upturned, ghastly faces, and a horrible fascination kept me by the bodies as long as I could endure the severe cold. Soon the noses, ears, and fingers began to turn white. Then the limbs and face assumed a towel look. I could stand the cold no longer and went inside, where I found a friend in cheerful conversation. In about an hour I went out and looked at the bodies. They were fast freezing. I could not shut out the sight of those freezing bodies outside. Neither could I bear to be in darkness, but I piled on the wood in the cavernous fireplace, and seated on a shingle block, passed the dreary night, terror-stricken by the horrible sights I had witnessed. January 8th. We shall want our men to plant our corn next spring, said a youngish-looking woman, the wife of one of the frozen men. And if you want to see them again, you come here about the 10th of next May. May 10th. The men commenced work at once, some shoveling away the snow and others tearing away the brush. Soon the box was visible. The cover was taken off, the layers of straw removed, and the foodies, frozen and apparently lifeless, lifted out and laid on the snow. Large troughs made of hemlock logs were placed nearby, filled with water into which the bodies were separately placed. With the head slightly raised, boiling water was then poured into the shroud from kettles hung on poles nearby until the water in the rough was hot as I could hold my breath in. Hemlock boughs had been put in the boiling water in such quantities that they had given the water the color of wine. After lying in this bath about an hour, color began to return to the bodies. When all hands began rubbing and chafing them, this continued about an hour, when a slight twitching of the muscles of his face and limb, followed by audible gasps, showed that life was not quenched, and that vitality was returning. Spirits were then given in small quantity, and allowed to trickle down their throats. Soon they could swallow, and more was given to them. When their eyes opened, and they began to talk, and finally sat up in their bathtub, they were then taken out and assisted to the house, where after a hearty dinner they seemed as well as ever, and in no way injured, but rather refreshed by their long sleep of 4 months. Time change, and old traditions have a way of fading out. These days, we Vermonters just buy an extra pair of woolen socks and throw in an extra blanket or two on top of Grandpa. You can check out this great article and listen to the MP3 on the subject of Vermont's hibernating hillfolk by Joe Trittrell on vpr.net. I hope you enjoyed the season finale of Frozen Till Spring. And if you'd like to hear more, let us know if you enjoyed Season 2. Season 3 will dive into some schools, because schools can be haunted, right? Until next time, stay spooky.